listening to the Devoted Dreamers podcast, and I'm your host, Merritt. I believe God has an unfolding plan for your life, a God-shaped dream just for you. But so much gets in the way, right? Fear, comparison, imposter syndrome. What if I mess this up? You are not alone in those feelings, and I'm so glad you're here for Season 8. Keep listening to gain some transformational tools that will help you release the lies so that you can freely show up in the world, offering your gifts, leaning on God in your weaknesses, and serving His kingdom with the dream He's given you. Hello, Devoted Dreamer. Welcome to episode 188. Before we get to today's guest, I want to talk to you for a minute about you and your God-shaped dream. Are you feeling weary of spinning your wheels about your dream, like it is wearing you out, not moving forward? Maybe you're just never sure what the next right step is, or it's difficult to discern how to take it, or you're stuck in the mindset of fear and questioning your value and worth, and whether this dream is really meant for you. Sister, I have been there too many times. Too many years have gone by dreaming about my dream instead of doing it. And I want more for you. That's why I've launched dream coaching services for busy Christian women like you who want to get serious about your dreams and implement a plan to follow through on what God has laid on your heart. Because if your dream is from Him, it is far too important to let it linger on the shelf any longer. I'm booking a few more dream coaching clients between now and the beginning of summer, and I'd love to connect with you to see if dream coaching is the right fit for you and your dream right now. You can sign up for a no-obligation discovery call today. I will put the link in the episode description, but you can also find it at bit.ly/dreamercall. And hey, if you are new around here, welcome to the podcast. I hope you'll find some encouragement to pursue whatever dream God has given you. My conversation today is with Amanda Bennett, a wife, a mom of 2 little ones, and host of the Gotcha Mama podcast. And I love interviewing other podcast hosts. It's so much fun. But Amanda lovingly shares on her show the challenges and joys of motherhood and opens doors for mamas to create meaningful connections and tear down insecurities. Her dream, like a lot of ours, was birthed out of her own difficult experiences early on in motherhood and her resulting desire that other new moms not feel so alone in their journey. So if you're a new mama, listen up and listen to the Gotcha Mama podcast. But for this conversation, there are so many lessons that we can learn along the way to our God-shaped dreams. And here are a few from this conversation with Amanda. Number 1, that you don't have to have it all figured out to get started on your dream. Number 2, that taking messy action is actually an act of obedience. And number 3, she talks about how she finds ways to just trust God while taking uncomfortable steps forward. And number 4, an important lesson Amanda learned just by using her own skills and gifts. Thank you for being here for this conversation. I hope it speaks to something that you need to hear today. And a little bit of insider information. Mark your calendar for April 13th, 2021, because I'm headed to the Gotcha Mama podcast with Amanda. She invited me to be a guest on her show, and we recorded her interview and my interview back to back on the same day. I'll be showing up for her audience to talk about how we pursue our God-shaped dreams, even when we have other significant responsibilities like motherhood. Okay, here we go with the interview with Amanda Bennett. Hey, Devoted Dreamers. I have Amanda Bennett from the Gotcha Mama podcast on today. Hi, Amanda.
Hello, Merritt.
How are you?
I'm doing so good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad we get to have this conversation finally. It's been a lot of navigating, but we're here and it's going to be a good one. Will you tell us about your God-shaped dream and kind of what inspired it?
Okay. Well, first of all, what a question to start off, because I feel like
0 to 60.
Just jump right into it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right there. Well, I say that because very, very simply speaking, I just want to use the gifts God has given me to point moms and women back to Him. I want to be able to be a good steward of everything that God has given me in order to glorify Him. And that's just, I mean, that could be a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. Which
And
is a great
so,
thing, right?
yeah, but then I am such a planner. I'm such a person that wants to know. I mean, when we go on vacation somewhere, I need to know what I'm going to pack. Like, what's the weather there? What are we going to do when we get there? And so, when God gives you these big ideas or all these options and says, here's what I've given you as this unique and wonderfully created person. Now go use them. I'm like, hold on.
You're like,
Wait a
what's
minute,
the weather
God.
going to be like when we get there?
Right. Yes. Please give me a little bit here. Do I need to pack a parka or a bathing suit? Like, come on.
Right.
And so navigating what that looks like more specifically in this season of my life has been a really interesting journey. And since I became a mom is when I really started tapping into that part of me and wanting to understand more of how God has specially equipped me to build his kingdom and live out those dreams he's given me. Because a lot of my life, and I feel like I've talked to a lot of moms who can relate to this, before becoming a mom, I was really focused on helping other people reach goals. And that felt like what I was supposed to be doing. And in that season, that probably was, that's what God gave me. But after becoming a mom, your priorities shift and you start to realize things about yourself. And I really wanted to get to know myself better as a person, as a mom. What am I equipped to do? What are my strengths? What matters to me right now? Because you're thrown into this whole new role that God has given you. God has given you these babies to take care of, but all of a sudden it's like your world just shifts and you have to figure out, how do I walk this out daily as the person that God created me to be? And so there was a lot of things I just had to. You've talked about wrestling with that too. Just figuring out, again, what's important to me? What am I good at? What do people look to me to help them with? And that is still something I navigate every day. You don't stop learning about yourself and you don't ever stop learning from God, honestly.
That is so true. And I appreciate you putting it into those words, because I think when we look at other people and their dreams, we think they have it figured out. Like, what's wrong with me that I'm still kind of wavering over here, a little bit undecided, or feeling maybe insecure about the path that I'm on. And so I really appreciate you kind of naming that and helping us identify, like, if you don't have all the answers, there's something wrong with you. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that a lot even still. And I do feel like I've been able to, in figuring out more about myself and my dreams, and you talk about just sitting down and giving yourself the space to understand what God has put on your heart, and knowing that has helped me tremendously in deciding how to move forward. And it pains me so much sometimes to take messy action, because I am we talked about this before, but I don't like. I want to research it. I want to do it to the best of my ability. I want it to be, quote unquote, as perfect as it can be. And that is not, a lot of times, that is not how it's supposed to be. I mean, God will work what he has intended for it through you, no matter how it looks. And I think that's, for me, that is so reassuring that it's not up to me to make it perfect, that God will still use that messy and whatever it is to do what he wants to do. But it's still just, sometimes it's so hard. And I think with the podcast, when I started the podcast, that came about in a way that I just allowed myself to take messy action. And it really was an act of obedience to what God had put on my heart when I started this almost 2 years ago. And I think you said too, if you had asked me 2 years ago, would you be doing this podcast? And I would have been like, no way, I'm not doing a podcast. I don't know I've never spoken before on a platform. I don't know technology. Like, no, that's just crazy. So allowing that messy action and just to, take those baby steps has been such a blessing in my life, allowing God to use that to like connecting with other moms has been such a blessing, and learning about what I'm good at and what I like has been a gift, really.
Yeah. And you learn that by doing it. You don't
Oh,
just like
yeah.
wake up one day and go, "Oh, I know that I would be good at podcasting."
Right. Right. And to your point about other people's dreams and seeing other people thinking they have it all together. I used to think that, and I'll get into this a little bit. I used to see other people that were so just focused on, it's my dream to be a doctor, and I want to be a pediatrician, and I just know this calling on my life, and this is it. And I used to look at those people and think, well, they are just extra blessed because
Mm.
they've got it all figured out. God has like clearly he's using the megaphone like, hey, you're going to be you're going to be a pediatrician, and you're going to do it for the glory of God. And I'm over here thinking, well, Lord, am I doing something wrong? Like, am I got to clean my ears out? Like, are you speaking to me here and I'm just not hearing it, or what's going on? And in this season of life and in this motherhood, I've realized that my my dream and my skills don't have to look like everybody else's. And like you said, it doesn't have to be all figured out right now. I think that is the big takeaway, is that it's more about the journey. I mean, you said that before. It is so much more about the journey and trusting in those little steps than it is about, oh, I'm going to get to this place. And God never said, here's your one thing to do, by the way. I'm going to go to Colossians because and this is my take on it, because I am not in ministry. I'm not a theologian, but in Colossians 3, it talks about, and whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Whatever you do. He doesn't say when you do that one thing. He doesn't say when I tell you to do this your whole life, you do that. He says whatever you do. And I think there's so much freedom in that.
And I mean, don't you see his heart for his daughters in that there isn't a checklist that we're all falling short on? I mean, that it would encompass whatever you do, whether it's hold that teeny tiny baby who will not go to sleep, or work a job or a dream to his glory. I mean, whatever it is, walk down the street in your neighborhood. Oh, I mean, I love it.
So, so freeing and so reassuring that, there's not like you said, there's not a checklist. There's not a pick this thing. I think a lot of times there comes a season where you have an option. You have two opportunities and you think, okay, Lord, which one do I take? Like, you might sit there and just pray, Lord, which one is the one you have for me? And the Lord will say, either one either one is the right choice. Like, do it to my glory. That's the answer. And you're like, okay, all right, awesome. But I think that, for people who are wired, like I said, like me, I want to know. Like, I want you to give me a little bit more context. And that's not what faith is all about. So I think that can be such a great relationship builder for you and the Lord when you just trust. You say, okay, either of these that I pick, I'm going to do to the glory of God. And that's the right thing for me right now. And God will use that.
That's beautiful. And I would love to hear, like, just trust is easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
So how has that played out for you? What does trusting in him look like?
Yeah, it can be really messy, honestly. And I think there have been seasons where I feel really close and connected and like I can hear very well, very clearly from God. And there have been seasons where things seem really noisy and it's really hard to trust. But I know for me, taking those little steps, even if it feels so uncomfortable, because sometimes it really does. It's scary, it's uncomfortable. But if I take that step and then I see, okay, the world didn't come crashing down. I'm still moving. And now I have this next step to do. And so I think, especially with the podcast, I noticed that God would continue to bring me guests as I trusted him. And every time I tried to grab a hold and do it myself and go out there and try to find a guest, either it would fall through or I would do the interview and it just didn't feel like it was supposed to happen. And every time I allowed him, I let go, like hold it loosely, right? Every time I let go just a little bit and allowed him to work, it felt so good to at that point go, oh, you know what, Lord, you were right. Like in spite of myself, you have shown that you are faithful yet again.
And isn't that so sweet that he does not tire of showing us his goodness?
Oh, yes.
That's a blessing. Well, I would love to have you talk about, you talk about no speaking experience. You would not have guessed a podcast would be a road that you'd go down. What has been like any fears you've struggled with or, just internal battles that you've had to fight against to make this happen?
Yeah. And in the beginning, just to kind of go back and the reason that I decided that this was how I was going to be obedient, because really when God puts something on your heart, like you said, he doesn't make you do anything. But I was at this point in my life, it was about a year and a half after my daughter was born, and I had lots of challenges with her. For one, I had some very unrealistic expectations about motherhood. And my daughter didn't like to sleep. I know just like your kids, she was very terrible sleeper. She ended up having a dairy protein allergy. And so we had a really difficult time breastfeeding. I got mastitis and breastfeeding just never really clicked for us. We ended up having to do special formula for her. She was never a good sleeper. And with just some other things. And I was not at a point in my life where I understood enough about how to ask for help and how to communicate what my needs were in a way that people would be able to respond and help me. And that really toxic mentality that I should be able to do this by myself was keeping me in this space of feeling anxious and stressed and just not enjoying that phase of motherhood. And I was not in community with other moms in order to be able to talk about this stuff. And so when I finally, and for one, I think even, I was attending church regularly. I had a small group, but it's one of those things that I did not had this idea, and there is a stigma around motherhood that, at least I was under the assumption that it's not supposed to be that hard. And so if it's that hard, then you're doing something wrong. And there's a little bit of shame involved in that.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to tell people, like, I don't want to say I'm really struggling at this, because then what are they going to say about me? Oh, she's a horrible mother. So when I finally decided, I just kind of reached a point where I was like, I can't do this. The breastfeeding was just terrible. And, all the things about breastfeeding being natural, which it is, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And so I just kind of spilled my guts to this friend at church one day. And I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. We're having such a hard time. My nipples are raw and I just want to quit, and just like, and I was thinking, okay, she is going to tell me I'm doing this all wrong and I don't need to be a mom. And this, just go on and on through the list of things I'm doing wrong. And she didn't. She didn't at all. She said, we went through the same thing. And my son is now great. That was a season. And yes, it was really hard. And you know what? This nipple cream is amazing. And you should try it.
That sure
And
helps.
yes. And that was the point for me where it kind of clicked. And I thought, other moms need this. Other moms need to be heard and understood and validated that if it is hard, it's not because you're doing it wrong. And that was kind of, in my mind, what started the idea of the podcast. But then, of course, then the fears, Merritt, then the fears come in, and I'm like, I don't have a platform. I don't know how to speak to people. And the Lord said, speak life right here. Just do it. And I was like, okay, all right. Well, I guess I'll just figure this out, because when God gives you a calling and you say, I'm going to be obedient to this, you just figure it out. And it is uncomfortable every step of the way. And it is scary, but it's also immensely rewarding in ways that like I said, I could not have even imagined.
Yeah, you've said a couple times the word uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that like normalizes it a little bit, that like following, being obedient to what God has called you to doesn't mean that it feels like roses and rainbows.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
it's probably going to be a bit outside your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And if not entirely outside your comfort zone.
Right.
And yet you still said yes.
Yeah, I did. And I think I say this sometimes, it's one of those things that I knew it was important enough to do it poorly. And I know that sounds really bad, but it was important enough to do it just to do it. Like, if it's bad, at least I did it and I was obedient, and it was worth doing. And so I think that propelled me to, click the button to make it live, to make it available for people to put it in their ears and listen, because it was not great. That's okay to admit that it was not great. It was not the best podcast ever, but I did it. And there was a lot of putting myself aside in that, being, the pride of, yeah, I did this, but it wasn't about me. So yeah, for me, and I don't, like you said, following God and living out your calling is uncomfortable sometimes, because especially if you like to live in the safe zone, And a lot of people like safety. Like it feels good. You know your boundaries, you know what's coming. You can, like I said, you plan if you need a parka or a bathing suit. That feels good. But God did not call us to live safely. And I am reminded that in every story of the Bible. Like, there are so many times where he has asked people to do things way out of their comfort zone. And when they are obedient, amazing things happen, like regardless of what they do. And that is such an amazing thing that God uses us to do that.
It is. I know. I often think like he could accomplish all of this on his own, and yet he chooses to give us an opportunity to do it with him. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's really generous and kind.
Yes. Yeah. But it is uncomfortable because
it is uncomfortable.
And that's okay. That's all right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to hear, especially as a mom with young kids, what kind of faith practices or specific verses of scripture, what's kind of bolstered you in this, comforted you in the discomfort? Like, what companions have you had along the way with God and his word?
Yeah. And I will say, in seasons of motherhood, if you're a mom, you understand that, your days may look different depending on how old your kids are. And when I had just one kid versus two, my day looked different. And before I had my second, and to some degree before I actually had my daughter, I was a part of a morning prayer group called the Fives. And this sounds really intense for moms right now, because I would not think of waking up at 5 a.m. for 5 days in 5 weeks of 5 days. Right now, I would not, unless, something crazy would have to happen. But what it was a small group of women, and we would check in in a group me app, and we would do a devotional. We get up at 5 a.m. for 5 days a week for 5 weeks, and we just do quiet time with the Lord, and we pray. And there is a little verse devotional that we think on and meditate and read some scripture. And that really was so good for me to have that dedicated time to just really dig into my prayer life and connecting with God and being intentional in that way. That was such a sweet time in my life and in my prayer life. And I would journal a lot, and I like to go back and read those things now. And I'm always amazed at what God had given me in those times. I don't wake up at 5 a.m. right now, and I rarely have an hour of prayer time, but I do try to get at least a devotional in the morning, and connect with other Christian moms, and really talk about what's happening in our life, and just pray for each other too. And that has been a huge encouragement, even though there's not like a regular time that it happens. That just kind of making it work is what moms do. And so that has been great. I did it's been a year or so ago, I did a study on the book of Joshua, and that was so impactful to me. For so many reasons, but that's over and over. God says to not fear, to be strong and courageous, do not fear. And I think it's, even in that, because he was being obedient, and he was trusting in the Lord. Joshua was like, okay, that doesn't mean they didn't fear. And that is such an encouragement, that it was like the Lord just kept saying, do not fear, because he knew we would fear. And that is huge for me because it is about obedience and trust, but it's also that God knows us and that God will give us what we need.
Yeah, I love that too. Just the reminder that even if all we have is a couple of minutes, to take those and, the temptation is pick up your phone and look at social media for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's a discipline to shift that and go, what's going to feed my soul is God's word, and taking the time to do that. And I mean, sometimes I feel like the time I spent as a single person with lots more hours a day in God's word, like maybe he was helping me store that up for now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is hard when you got little
It is
ones.
really
And
hard. And
yeah.
I'm just as guilty as the next person for picking up my phone and scrolling social media, but I have become so much more aware that when I allow myself to do that versus taking a moment to say a prayer or to meditate on a verse, how that feels in my soul, like how that then manifests in the way that I act towards my children. And I think being aware of that is the first step, obviously. There's so many distractions that are working against us as moms, and I am far from perfect, but I think being aware of those triggers and those things that do make you anxious or pull you away from feeling connected to God or pulling you away from feeling connected with your children or your spouse, that's where you need to start. And feeling those times back in with things that fill you up, praying or reading a verse or just listening. Just, I know it's not quiet when you have kids around, but just allowing the Spirit to be there to speak to you if that's what he wants to do. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Thanks for helping normalize that it just is not going to look the same way every single day if you've got little kids in
no,
your house.
it will not.
Well, hey, I do want to give you a minute to just kind of tell us who your podcast is for in case the podcast listener is out there like, tell me more, I want to listen.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then talk about your freebie that you have to share.
Yeah. So the podcast is geared towards moms with young kids. And we talk a lot about self-care and mental health. We talk about physical health. There's a lot of faith involved in that. I myself am a Christian, obviously, but not everyone who comes on the podcast is a Christian. I ask people to share their journey and their life honestly. And so if talking about God and their faith is part of that, then I encourage that. So you will hear stories of faith. There's adoption and moms with disabilities and overcoming obstacles and challenges just in that early motherhood with young kids. There's things that are challenging, there's things that are really awesome and we want to celebrate that too. But I'd love to have you listen, check it out. And the freebie is it's 10 free ways to practice self-care in 5 minutes or less, because I'm a mom and I know you don't have more than 5 minutes a lot of times, and you still need to be able to practice self-care. And when I say self-care, I don't mean get your nails done. I don't mean take a shower, although yes, you should take a shower. But there are
occasionally.
Yes, at least, a couple times a week. So there are some things that you can do. You don't have to spend money to do, and you can absolutely take care of yourself and your mental health. And, if you're a Christian, that 100% includes reading the Bible and memorizing verses and saying affirmations and meditating on the word. But there are some other things you can do in your day also. And so I have 10 things listed there and would love for you to check it out on my website. It's gotchamama.com.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to put that in the show notes too, in case we aren't able to write it down where we are in this moment of listening.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I would love to close with just hearing a little bit of reflection from you on, looking back to, knowing that you had this dream to support, encourage moms, maybe not even really knowing how,
Mhm.
um, to now, as you've taken those steps and walked forward in fear and just been obedient to what he's called you to, how has he transformed you in the process of this?
This is such a great question, and I think it allowed me to really reflect on that for myself, to really acknowledge what God has done in my life, and a lot of it really is just growing in the confidence of the abilities that He's given me. Um, I know that those are gifts that He's given me and has given them to me to use them for His glory. And I don't think I would have been able to tap into those things had I not started this journey podcasting. These may have laid dormant for who knows how long. And I think being able to exercise some of these strengths and passions and just seeing where that leads me th- that is the next step for me because that allows me to then be able to use them even more. And that's not to say I don't trust God. It was that I was doubting that I could do that. And understanding that it wasn't up to me was the hurdle. And so once I got over that, it really allowed me to, like I said, to practice these things and live out these things. And I've heard the likeness before of, when you get gifts at Christmas, would you let them just sit under the tree unopened? No, absolutely you wouldn't. You would go and open them and you'd want to play with them and use them. And I'm reminded of that when I think about these new kind of passions and desires and skills that I've found that I have, and it makes me want to use them more. And I will say it's also to a large degree shown me that I don't need to have it all figured out. I don't need to have it all planned out, that just those little steps at a time will help me to live out what God has put in my, and I may not know the whole picture, and that's okay. Um, and I think that's been the biggest gift is that if I just keep being obedient, I don't have to know the whole thing right now. I couldn't even handle it if I knew the whole thing right now. So that has been a huge thing for me. And just to see the people He's put in my life through this and the connections I've been able to make, again, has been such a blessing for me, like I said, in ways that I just could not have guessed. Um, and so I think that transformation within me and just being obedient, being okay, being uncomfortable, honestly, that is something that I work on every day. But that is such a huge piece of, again, not having to have it all figured out.
Thanks for listening today. Don't let the conversation end here. Let's connect over in the Devoted Dreamers Insiders group on Facebook. We're building a sweet community of dreamers, so no one has to walk this road alone. You can find the group at bit.ly/dreamergroup. I'll see you in there.